I'm calling the police. You can explain your story to them.
Please do call them. Ask for Captain Rodriguez. Would I ask for someone specific?
Because he'll tell you who I am before you embarrass yourself further.
I don't care who you think you are.
I'm Judge Camille Jefferson, Federal District Court, and you just violated my civil rights. You need to come with me right now. I saw what you did. I didn't do anything.
Store Detective Emily Clark was so convinced of her own racial profiling skills that even when Federal Judge Camille Jefferson identified herself, Clark refused to believe it. That moment of stubborn racism would cost Nordstrom $3.8 million and expose how retail security often operates on bias rather than evidence. Quick pause. I love seeing how global our community is getting. Let me know in the comments. Which part of the world are you tuning in from today? Also, if you value independent storytelling that digs deeper for the truth, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is the only way we can keep exposing these untold stories. It was 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon at Nordstrom's flagship store in downtown Seattle. The jewelry department hummed with weekend shoppers, browsing diamond earrings and designer watches. Natural light poured through the store's glass ceiling, illuminating display cases filled with pieces that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Among the browsers was Federal Judge Camille Jefferson, taking a rare Saturday off from her demanding schedule to find a gift for her daughter's law school graduation. Judge Jefferson had spent 15 years on the federal bench, presiding over complex civil rights cases, corporate fraud trials, and constitutional challenges. At 42, she was one of the youngest federal judges in the Western District, appointed after a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney. She'd argued before the Supreme Court twice, won landmark discrimination cases, and earned respect from colleagues across the political spectrum. Her legal mind was sharp, her judgment sound, and her commitment to justice unwavering. That afternoon, she wore a red blazer over a white blouse and black dress pants, her shoulder-length hair styled professionally even on her day off. She moved through the store with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Examining a pearl necklace she thought her daughter might like, she had every right to be there, money to spend, and no reason to expect what was about to happen. Emily Clark had been working retail security for Nordstrom for 3 years. At 34, she'd held similar positions at various department stores, building what she considered expertise in spotting shoplifters. Her employee file contained 6 customer complaints, all involving confrontations with black shoppers who Clark had followed, questioned, or detained without cause. Each complaint had been dismissed by management with minimal investigation, Clark receiving brief training sessions that she attended but never internalized. Clark operated on assumptions rather than evidence. In her mind, expensive stores attracted certain types of thieves, and those thieves had certain characteristics. When she saw a black woman spending time in the jewelry department, touching multiple pieces, examining price tags, Clark's biased training kicked in. She didn't see a federal judge shopping for her daughter. She saw a potential criminal who needed watching. Store manager Julian Carter knew about Clark's complaint history but had been reluctant to address it directly. Seattle's tight job market made finding replacement security difficult, and Clark was punctual, wrote detailed reports, and appeared dedicated to loss prevention. Carter had noted her tendency toward aggressive customer interactions but attributed it to enthusiasm rather than bias. From her position near the store's entrance, Clark watched Judge Jefferson examine jewelry for 15 minutes. She noted how Jefferson handled pieces carefully, read price tags, and spoke quietly with sales associates. Normal customer behavior that Clark interpreted through suspicion. Judge Jefferson had no idea she was being watched. She was simply a mother shopping for her daughter's graduation gift, comparing pieces, considering what would best commemorate such an important achievement. She held a pearl bracelet up to the light, admiring how the afternoon sun made it gleam, thinking about how proud she was of her daughter's accomplishment. Clark made her decision. Time to investigate. Emily Clark positioned herself behind a display of handbags, maintaining visual contact with Judge Jefferson while appearing to organize merchandise. This was how Clark had been trained to conduct surveillance, though her training had focused on actual theft indicators rather than racial profiling. She pulled out her phone and began documenting what she saw, building a case in her mind that existed nowhere but in her biased imagination. Judge Jefferson moved from the pearl bracelet to a section displaying gold earrings. She examined several pairs, holding them up to catch the light, reading the small cards that described their origins and craftsmanship. Her movements were deliberate but unhurried, the behavior of someone who could afford to take time making an expensive purchase. She smiled at a sales associate who approached, asking questions about the jewelry's quality and return policy. Clark interpreted these normal interactions as suspicious. In her mental notes, Jefferson was taking too long, asking too many questions, gathering information for a potential theft. She began typing observations into her phone. Subject: examining multiple high-value items. Extended time in jewelry section. Asking detailed questions about merchandise. None of these observations constituted evidence of criminal intent. But in Clark's mind, they were building blocks of a case. The sales associate helping Judge Jefferson was Maria Santos, a 5-year Nordstrom employee who prided herself on reading customers accurately. Santos immediately recognized Jefferson as someone with both the means and intention to make a significant purchase. Jefferson's questions were informed, her interest genuine, her demeanor that of someone accustomed to quality merchandise. Santos pulled out several pieces she thought might interest Jefferson, explaining the differences between various designers and discussing the store's custom setting services. From 20 feet away, Clark watched this interaction with growing suspicion. She saw Jefferson handling multiple pieces of expensive jewelry, saw Santos removing items from locked cases, saw Jefferson examining pieces closely. Clark's bias training told her this was exactly how sophisticated shoplifters operated, gaining trust, handling merchandise, creating opportunities for concealment. Julian Carter was in his office reviewing weekly sales reports when he noticed Clark had been in the same section for over 20 minutes. Through the store's security cameras, he watched her hovering near the jewelry department, phone in hand, clearly conducting surveillance on someone. This behavior concerned him because Carter knew Clark's history with complaints, and he recognized the signs of another potential incident developing. Judge Jefferson decided she liked a pair of diamond stud earrings that would complement her daughter's professional wardrobe. She asked Santos about the store's gift wrapping services and warranty policies. Normal questions for someone planning a significant purchase. Santos began explaining Nordstrom's return policy, describing how they stood behind their jewelry with lifetime services and repairs. Clark interpreted this extended conversation as further evidence of suspicious activity. In her mind, Jefferson was gathering operational intelligence, learning about store policies that might help her return stolen merchandise or understand security procedures. She moved closer, positioning herself behind a perfume counter where she could hear their conversation while pretending to inspect fragrance displays. Judge Jefferson thanked Santos for her help and asked to see one more piece, a delicate gold necklace in a nearby case. Santos obliged, unlocking another display and removing the necklace for Jefferson's examination. This was standard customer service, the kind of personalized attention that distinguished Nordstrom from other retailers. Jefferson appreciated Santos's knowledge and patience, making a mental note to mention her helpfulness to management. Clark saw opportunity. Jefferson was now holding multiple pieces of jewelry, had been in the department for nearly 30 minutes, and was asking to see additional items. In Clark's biased calculation, this represented the perfect moment for intervention before any alleged theft could occur. She began walking toward them, her phone ready to record, convinced she was about to prevent a crime that existed only in her prejudiced imagination. Emily Clark approached Judge Jefferson with the confidence of someone who believed she was preventing a crime. She positioned herself directly in front of Jefferson, blocking her path to other areas of the store. Her body language was aggressive, shoulders squared, chin raised, the posture of someone asserting authority they didn't actually possess. "Excuse me, ma'am," Clark said, her voice carrying the false politeness that often precedes confrontation. "I'm going to need you to come with me to the security office." Judge Jefferson looked up from the gold necklace she was examining. Surprised by the interruption, she immediately recognized the tone and demeanor she'd encountered in courtrooms when dealing with overzealous prosecutors who confused aggression with competence. "I'm sorry, what for?" Jefferson asked, her voice calm, but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "I've been observing your behavior for the past 30 minutes, Clark replied, pulling out her phone to show she'd been recording. "You've been acting suspiciously, handling multiple pieces of expensive jewelry, asking unusual questions about store policies." Maria Santos, the sales associate, stepped forward immediately. "Excuse me. This customer is working with me. She's interested in purchasing items as gifts. There's nothing suspicious about her behavior." Santos had witnessed enough confrontations to recognize racial profiling when she saw it, and her voice carried the frustration of someone watching injustice unfold. Clark ignored Santos entirely, keeping her focus on Judge Jefferson. "Ma'am, I need you to open your purse and show me what's inside. Store policy allows us to inspect bags when theft is suspected." Judge Jefferson's expression shifted from surprise to controlled anger. As a federal judge, she'd presided over countless cases involving unlawful detention, false accusations, and civil rights violations. She recognized exactly what was happening, and her legal mind began cataloging the constitutional violations occurring in real time. "Officer, I haven't stolen anything," Jefferson said, using her courtroom voice that commanded attention. "I've been shopping with this associate's assistance. I have receipts for any items I've purchased, and I'm happy to show them to you. But I will not submit to an illegal search based on your assumptions." Several other customers had begun to notice the commotion. An elderly white woman shopping nearby moved closer, curious about what was happening. A young couple examining watches stopped their conversation to watch. Two teenagers with their mother paused their shopping to observe the confrontation, phones appearing as they sensed something significant was occurring. Clark felt the pressure of growing attention and doubled down on her accusations. "Ma'am, refusing to cooperate only makes you look more guilty. I've been doing this job for 3 years, and I know suspicious behavior when I see it. You've been in this section too long, handling too much merchandise, asking too many questions." "Suspicious behavior?" Jefferson repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You mean shopping while black? Because that's what this is about, isn't it? You saw a black woman in your jewelry department and decided I must be a criminal." The accusation of racial profiling hit Clark like a slap. In her mind, she was a professional security officer preventing theft, not a racist targeting customers based on skin color. The suggestion that her actions were motivated by bias rather than evidence triggered a defensive response that made her double down harder. "This has nothing to do with race," Clark insisted, though her voice carried the uncertainty of someone who wasn't entirely convinced of her own words. "This is about preventing theft. You fit the profile of shoplifters we've seen in this department." "What profile exactly?" Jefferson demanded, her legal training taking over. "Describe this profile for everyone here to understand." Clark realized she'd walked into a trap, but couldn't back down without admitting her actions were baseless. Emily Clark's face flushed with defensive anger as she struggled to justify her profiling without admitting what it actually was. The growing crowd of witnesses made her feel cornered, and cornered people often make their worst decisions. "Look, I don't have time for games," she snapped. "Either cooperate with security procedures or I'm calling the police to sort this out." Judge Jefferson straightened to her full height, her demeanor shifting from controlled patience to judicial authority. She'd given Clark multiple opportunities to recognize her mistake and back down. Those opportunities had been rejected. "Please do call the police," Jefferson said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "When you do, ask specifically for Captain Alvarez. He'll be very interested in this situation." Clark blinked, momentarily thrown off by the specificity of the request. "Why would I ask for someone specific? I'll call whoever responds to the call, because Captain Alvarez will tell you exactly who I am before you embarrass yourself any further," Jefferson replied, pulling out her leather credential case with deliberate calm. "He'll also explain the federal civil rights violations you're currently committing." The confidence in Jefferson's voice made Clark hesitate for the first time. Something about the way this woman spoke suggested authority that Clark hadn't anticipated. But 3 years of unchecked profiling had made Clark arrogant, convinced that her instincts were infallible. "I don't care who you think you are," Clark declared, though her voice carried less conviction than before. "You'll have no problem cooperating with security." Judge Jefferson opened her credential case, revealing her federal judge's badge and official identification card. She held it at eye level, directly in front of Clark's face, speaking with the authority that had commanded respect in federal courtrooms for 15 years. "I'm Judge Camille Jefferson, United States District Court for the Western District of Washington, and you, Miss Clark, have just violated my 4th and 14th Amendment rights under color of law. You've engaged in racial profiling and harassment of a federal judicial officer." The words hit Clark like a physical blow. She stared at the credentials, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Federal judge, real badge, official identification. Everything about her assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. But Clark's pride in 3 years of getting away with similar behavior made her double down even when facing undeniable evidence of her mistake. "Anyone can buy a fake badge online," she stammered, though her voice shook with uncertainty. "These could be counterfeit." Judge Jefferson's expression shifted to something resembling pity. "You're making this situation exponentially worse for yourself." Maria Santos stepped forward, having watched the entire exchange with growing horror. "Emily, what are you doing? She's obviously telling the truth. Look at those credentials. This is a federal judge, and you're accusing her of shoplifting." Store manager Julian Carter had been watching through security cameras and came rushing over as he realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. He arrived just in time to hear Clark questioning the authenticity of federal judicial credentials, and his face went pale with recognition of the legal disaster developing before his eyes. "Judge Jefferson," Carter said immediately, recognizing her from newspaper photos and public events. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for this completely inappropriate interaction." Clark turned to Carter in confusion. "Julian, this woman has been acting suspiciously. I was following proper loss prevention protocols." "Emily," Carter said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a career-ending verdict. "That is Federal Judge Camille Jefferson. She presides over civil rights cases in our district, and you just racially profiled her in our store." The blood drained from Clark's face as the full reality crashed down on her. Federal judge. Civil rights cases. Racial profiling. Her career. Her future. Everything she'd built was crumbling in real time. But even faced with her manager's confirmation and federal credentials, Clark's pride refused to let her admit complete defeat. "I was just doing my job," she insisted weakly. "Loss prevention requires vigilance. I saw suspicious behavior and investigated." Judge Jefferson's patience had reached its limit. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Captain Alvarez? This is Judge Jefferson. I'm at the Nordstrom flagship store on Pine Street, and I need you to respond personally to a civil rights incident." "Yes. I'll wait for you here." First. The mention of calling police captain directly sent panic through Clark. Real criminals didn't have police captains' personal numbers. Innocent people didn't speak with such authority about civil rights incidents. Every detail was confirming what Clark desperately didn't want to believe. Carter immediately moved into damage control mode, his mind racing through the legal and public relations nightmare unfolding. "Judge Jefferson, please, let me get our regional director on the phone immediately. We need to address this situation at the highest level." Other customers had begun recording the confrontation on their phones. The teenage shoppers were live streaming to social media. The elderly woman was taking photos. Within minutes, video of a Nordstrom security guard refusing to believe a federal judge's credentials would be spreading across the internet. "Ma'am, I need you to stop recording," Clark demanded from one of the teenagers, finally realizing the scope of witnesses documenting her behavior. But it was far too late for damage control. Judge Jefferson addressed the growing crowd with judicial composure. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed here today is racial profiling disguised as security protocol. This store employee targeted me for surveillance and harassment based solely on my appearance. When I showed federal judicial credentials, she claimed they were fake. This is how systemic racism operates in retail environments. The crowd murmured with obvious discomfort and anger. Several people expressed support for Judge Jefferson and criticism of Clark's behavior. The optics were devastating, made worse by Clark's continued inability to simply apologize and acknowledge her mistake. Within 12 minutes, Captain Alvarez arrived with 2 officers. He was a 25-year veteran who'd worked with Judge Jefferson on numerous cases involving police misconduct and civil rights violations. His respect for her was evident in his immediate deference and concern. Judge Jefferson, I came as soon as you called. Are you all right? Alvarez asked, his tone making clear that this was not a routine response to a shoplifting call. Clark watched in growing horror as the police captain treated her suspect with obvious professional respect and familiarity. Every assumption she'd made was being systematically destroyed by reality, but the damage was already irreversible. Captain Alvarez took Judge Jefferson's statement with the thoroughness of an officer who understood the gravity of civil rights violations. He documented every detail of Clark's behavior, from the initial surveillance through the confrontation and refusal to accept federal credentials. His report would become evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings that would reshape retail security practices across the region. Judge Jefferson, I want to assure you that this incident will be investigated fully, Alvarez said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd worked with her on police accountability cases. What happened here today violates both store policy and federal law. Emily Clark stood frozen as she watched the captain treat her suspect as a respected colleague and fellow law enforcement professional. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. 3 years of unchecked racial profiling had convinced Clark that her instincts were reliable, that her assumptions were justified. Facing a federal judge destroyed every racist stereotype that had guided her actions. Within 48 hours, Judge Jefferson had retained civil rights attorney Marcus Williams, who specialized in retail discrimination cases. Williams reviewed the security camera footage, witness statements, and Clark's employment history. What he found was a pattern of racial profiling that Nordstrom had ignored for 3 years, creating the perfect foundation for a federal lawsuit. The lawsuit named Emily Clark, store manager Julian Carter for inadequate supervision, and Nordstrom Corporation for tolerating discriminatory practices. The allegations were comprehensive. Racial profiling under federal civil rights law, unlawful detention, violation of constitutional protections, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and corporate negligence in training and oversight. Clark was terminated within 1 week. Her termination letter was direct and unambiguous. Employee engaged in racial profiling of a federal judge, refused to acknowledge federal credentials, and created significant legal liability for the corporation. Employment terminated immediately for cause. Her 3-year security career ended. Her reputation destroyed. Her future in retail permanently damaged. Nordstrom's corporate response was swift and comprehensive. Regional Director Monique Grant personally apologized to Judge Jefferson, announcing immediate policy changes requiring supervisory approval before any customer detention, mandatory bias training for all security personnel, and quarterly review of complaints involving racial profiling. The company's insurance lawyers quickly determined that fighting a federal judge's discrimination lawsuit would be both expensive and futile. The case settled 18 months later for $3.8 million, among the largest retail discrimination settlements in Washington state history. Judge Jefferson donated a portion of the settlement to civil rights organizations working on retail justice issues, using her experience to advocate for systematic change in how stores train security personnel. Judge Jefferson testified before the Seattle City Council about her experience, her words carrying the authority of both personal victim and legal expert. I am a federal judge with 15 years on the bench. I have prosecuted civil rights violations, presided over discrimination cases, and dedicated my career to equal justice under law, and I was treated like a criminal for shopping while black in a department store. If this can happen to me, with all my credentials and authority, imagine what happens to people without my resources and position. The testimony led to citywide retail accountability measures. Stores faced mandatory training requirements, complaint tracking systems, and financial penalties for patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Judge Jefferson's case became a template for addressing retail racism through legal accountability rather than voluntary compliance. Emily Clark never worked in security again. Her name became synonymous with retail racial profiling. In industry training materials, she released one brief statement through an attorney. "I made serious errors in judgment that caused harm to Judge Jefferson and violated her civil rights. I accept full responsibility for my actions." But acceptance of responsibility came too late to repair the damage to her career or reputation. The case created lasting change beyond individual consequences. Nordstrom implemented new training protocols that were adopted by major retailers nationwide. Security industry publications analyzed the case as a cautionary tale about the costs of unchecked bias. Law enforcement agencies used the incident to illustrate how racial profiling destroys both careers and communities. Judge Jefferson continued her distinguished judicial career, but the incident reminded her daily that even federal credentials couldn't shield her from racism. She used her platform to educate others about the persistence of discrimination in everyday spaces, speaking at law schools and conferences about the intersection of racial justice and retail policy. And if you believe documenting these moments matters, tap that subscribe button. We're not stopping the work. We're continuing to track the patterns, continuing to insist on better treatment, continuing to support the people who deserve safety without conditions. This isn't about a single security guard or a single judge. It's about the systems shaping how people are treated every day.